My name is Jessica May, and I don't work here. I'm the chief curator of the Portland Museum of Art in Maine and the co-curator with the inimitable Patterson Sims of Richard Estes Realism. Tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Patterson and to Richard, and then turning the podium over. First to Patterson, who will share some insights about the exhibition and the art of Richard Estes, and then he will share the stage with Richard for a conversation which I know that you're all eager to hear. I have to say, coming from Maine, this is an amazingly impressive audience for 6 p.m. on a Friday night in October, holiday weekend. I know it's a big deal. I anticipate that the opportunity to hear this evening's remarks will either reinforce the pleasure that you have had seeing Richard's great paintings, or for those of you who have not yet seen Richard Estes Realism, which just opened today upstairs, this will rouse your attention. You'll need to cancel your dinner reservations, maybe tomorrow's fun as well, so that you can linger in the galleries where the show has been beautifully installed by our collaborator and our co-conspirator, the American Art Museum's own Virginia Mecklenburg, who is very sorry to miss this evening. On behalf of the American Art Museum and my colleague Virginia, I want to thank you all for coming again. I know that there are many of you who have enjoyed the art of Richard Estes for many years, and we too, who have been working on this show for many years, feel tonight as a culmination. I do want to ask for everyone's enjoyment that you take a moment to silence your cell phone, and that you observe that there will be a question and answer period following a conversation between Richard and Patterson. So we'll ask you to present your questions to microphones at the edges of the aisles, so that for those folks who are listening to this via the website or whatever other technical means they manage to find it, they'll be able to hear your questions as well. Then the final sort of housekeeping bit I have is that at the conclusion of tonight's program, we'll ask you to please consider completing a comment card, which is located in the auditorium lobby, and they can be deposited in collection boxes in the auditorium or the G Street lobby, or you can put it in the mail, and it already has a stamp, or some version of a stamp. Richard Estes is one of the foremost realist artists of the past half-century and is known throughout the world, really, although I think of him as a quintessential American artist for his meticulously realized canvases, all based on his own photographs. He is the maker of the photograph and the painting. Patterson will talk in great depth about Richard's work and will introduce him more completely than I ever could, but I'll sneak in a word now about the importance about Richard and the importance of this exhibition by saying that what the art of Richard Estes has offered me over the past half century is a sustained and often astonishingly elegant meditation on the look of things and on the brilliant, expansive, and often joyful image of the world. His paintings demand our time and our close attention, and they reward our patient study with revelation after revelation. So over the course of the past several years working on this project, I personally had the experience of receiving gift after gift, revelation after revelation, which I believe adds up to a very bold statement on your part, Richard, about what art is and what it should be in our hectic and often confusing world. To give you a bit of background on the exhibition itself, shortly before I began working in Portland 2.5 years ago now, I had a meet and greet with our director, Mark Bassier, and he looked at me and sort of said, I have a little something you might find fun in the works. And it turned out that it was this exhibition project, which at 50 paintings and a Yale published book was not at all a little something, but it was a lot of fun. Instead, this project was the brainchild of Patterson Sims, who has known Richard for decades. And although we worked very closely together, Patterson deserves all credit for making this project even thinkable, even a possibility, let alone the reality that it has become. It has been tremendously complex and rewarding, and I think you'll get an immediate feeling of the richness of the project from the minute you walk into the first gallery and the first pages of the catalog, which I highly encourage you to buy. The Portland Museum of Art worked with the American Art Museum and Patterson to bring this project to fruition, and we're delighted to see it complete its tour this fall in DC. I must say that at least once a day in our galleries, visitors tell me how frustrated they are that the show has now left town. So it's notable that this is the first this is the first museum exhibition of Richard Estes paintings in America since an exhibition at the Portland Museum of Art in 1991. So we definitely claim him as one of our own. Now I'll introduce Patterson, who is known throughout the art world as an incredibly keen and insightful curator, collaborator, and friend, and to me, absolutely a mentor for which I will be forever grateful. He's going to introduce you to the work and the story of our beloved national treasure, Richard Estes, and to this exhibition. Patterson has come to us tonight from New York City, where he's an independent curator, writer, and consultant. He's the chairman of the board of Independent Curators International, an organization that supports emerging curatorial talent through training and mentorship, and he is the president of the Leon Polk Smith Foundation. Patterson began his career at the legendary art gallery O.K. Harris Works of Art, and then was the first curator of the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. Then he moved on to associate director for art and exhibitions. I believe I have edited a line out. He moved to Seattle, where he had a very impressive job at the Seattle Art Museum. And then he returned to MoMA, where he was the deputy director for education and research support at the Museum of Modern Art, and is director of the Montclair Art Museum in New Jersey before he has become the full-time independent curator that he is now. While we worked on this exhibition, Patterson also worked on a number of other impressive projects, including exhibitions of the work of, and this is amazing to me, Philip Pearlstein, Joyce Scott, Laverne Kelly, and Willie Cole. He has worked with literally dozens of artists, and what I've gleaned the most insight from in working with Patterson these past 2 years is a much deeper understanding of the nuanced and deep trust that must exist between an artist and his or her curator, and how much insight can be generated from the careful tending and care of that relationship. This exhibition is a true testament to Patterson's belief that if you stay in conversation with an artist, if you engage with them and believe in the power of their individual voice, everyone benefits eventually. And what I know is that we'll enjoy tonight is the fruits of Patterson's labors. Working with Richard day after day for several years, knowing him for decades, he offers an unparalleled insight into the career of Richard Estes. Thank you and welcome.
You can see what a sweetheart Jessica is, and we never even knew each other before this project, so it's fantastic for me. And I thank Richard once again, Richard, because I've always loved your work, and now you're really building all these friendships into my life, and so I'm very, very appreciative. The first words of thanks, of course, do go to Richard, and many of you have been to see the show upstairs, and you'll see it after this. I'll try to be really quick, because I think you want to hear Richard, I think, maybe more than me, but I'm going to do my best and just try to make a little introduction to Richard's work. Richard's work makes us look, and makes us look very carefully, and it gives us something that's worth looking at carefully. And there are many different ways he does that. The overall way is to take a photographic source, or several sources in his work, and turn those sources into a work of art. We believe in all the images that are upstairs because they're depicted for us in a way that we would call photographically precise. But Richard is not really a photorealist. He's a photo-derived painter. And he uses photography in a really interesting way. He takes all the photographs himself. He then looks at the images that he's taken, and he uses them as an impressionist painter might use the landscape as she or he would be standing on a field or looking at other subjects that they would depict as the material that they're looking at. But in no way does he project the photograph onto the canvas or use any of those kinds of techniques. It's really for him an opportunity to develop a series of very precise sketches, and then from those sketches create the works of art he has here. One of the ways that Richard does make us look, though, and look with a certain kind of mirth, is to find his signature in his works. And so surrounding the name of the exhibition are a series of the various signatures in the works. And one of the signatures is actually Richard's name in Japanese, in characters, and it's his phonetic spelling of Richard Estes. In that particular painting, which is a painting of Shinjuku, which is a wonderful, lively part of Tokyo, I can't find anything in other kinds of script. I remember once finding his name in the painting and then learning that it was added in a second way there. But essentially, in many of the paintings that you'll see in the exhibition, Richard's name will be embedded in the work, and I encourage you to find them because it only makes the act of looking at Richard's work even more fascinating. Now, Richard's work emerges, as all artists' work emerge, from really, in his case, a very careful study, and the study occurred at the Art Institute School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He was brought up outside of Chicago, really in the country, in Sheffield originally, where he spent his early years, and then his family, realizing, I think, how extraordinarily bright he was and gifted, wanted to get him to a better school, and they got him to school in Evanston. Evanston also had the great advantage of being quite closely connected to Chicago by public transportation. So Richard went in a lot and was able to really find a lot, the foundation of the life that he has built as a person who's actually just as deeply interested in architecture and music as he is in art, and a person who really developed the culture that only really comes or can really come in wonderful ways from cities. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because, or maybe just sort of providing the foundation for these two images, which are amongst the earliest of the mature work of Richard. And in one case, it's such an early work that it's sort of a premature work. It's the group of figures that are sitting on a park bench, probably done around 1964 or 65. And it's based, again, on photographs of Richard, but it's almost, and maybe Richard will stop me when I'm saying, but it's almost as if he was afraid of the precision of the photograph. He wasn't quite ready to give himself to making a realism that was so precisely based on photography. Very wisely and very happily for all of us in this room, around the mid-60s, as he was sort of approaching in his early 30s, he realized, if I want to be an artist, I'm going to have to figure out a way to make an art, and to make an art that really is true to what I'm interested in doing. And what he really has loved since he was a very young person is photography. So he knew he wanted to be a painter, but at the same time, he wanted to really use photography as the source for those paintings. And so he took various jobs, and some of the jobs were desk jobs in offices, but essentially he was always an independent person. He accumulated a little bit of money. He said, I'm going to take this money, I'm going to really devote about a year of my life, or as many months as I can do, to making a body of work. And that body of work was really made from walking around his neighborhood. He lived on the Upper West Side, seeing the buildings and sort of spaces in that neighborhood that attracted him, especially the facades of building. And so he developed a small group of works that he'd finished and had some ideas for some other works. And then he did what really is almost impossible now to be done by an artist, which is to really go to the galleries of New York City, which at that point were located between West 57th Street and up to East 86th Street, and sort of methodically go gallery by gallery. Richard luckily found the gallery of his dreams on 86th Street, but that required a lot of walking because in fact that was the last gallery that he went to as he moved up, and it was Alan Stone Gallery, a wonderful, venerable kind of historic gallery, Alan Stone's gallery, and there aren't any galleries higher than 96th Street. So luckily, Alan Stone was smart enough to say, this is kind of remarkable. This was the end of 1967, and he said, how about having a show? And Richard said, okay, when? February of 1968. So he had this wonderful show, and the work that illustrated the sort of publication that was put out, or the brochure that was put out in conjunction with that show, was a work called Horn and Hardart, which you'll see upstairs. And these pictures all sold very, very well. And so Richard developed from day one an extraordinary following. Now, when he was at the Art Institute School in Chicago, I said to him, what did you study when you were there? He said, well, I had to take some courses, and I usually took them off campus at DePaul, which was not so far away from the campus of the university, or excuse me, of the school, which is right in the Art Institute of Chicago. So the very act of going to class means you're passing marvelous works of art, and a couple of them I'll show you in just a second, which I think had a strong influence on Richard. But in any event, he went to that school, and he learned what he learned in that place. But effectively, he really didn't come alive, I think, like so many artists, until he came to New York City, which was at the end of the 1950s, in the summer of 1958. And he, by the mid-60s, by his early 30s and the mid-60s, really, as I said, resolved that he was going to become a painter, and a painter who had his own very special way of looking at the world. So these two works really show that kind of leap that he made, where he really decided, I can have total precision in my work. I can have a total photographic base in my work. And so he went in approximately 64, 65, the seated figures in the park, which is the image closest to me, to the automat-ish image, which comes from 1966 to maybe even 68, because he sort of polished it off and became even more refined a little bit later. It's a painting which you really begin to think, I want you to think in these terms. It's a realist painting, an extraordinarily realist work, which at the same time is based and has its kind of strength in so many ways from the abstract understructure that really it builds from. And you see this marvelous kind of clustering of square shapes and this wonderful overlay of forms. You also see Richard saying, look, I may have, at the Art Institute of Chicago, made an enormous number of, all my classes were really devoted to drawing the figure and working with the figure, but I'm going to put the figure aside. I'm not going to leave it out, but I want to find ways to suppress it. Well, he found this very clever way to suppress it, to go upstairs to the mezzanine floor of another Horn and Hardach that he was visiting, and he looked down and he saw this quartet of people and made the image of it. But very quickly he realized he did actually want to have even fewer people in his works. And so, in a sense, one almost says goodbye to the figure in Richard's work with this wonderful work in the upper, what I guess is your left-hand corner of the screen. And you see a young man's face as he is leaving, or as he is in the back of the bus, and I think, maybe, can you all see that? I thought I had a pointer here. But it's also, and when you go upstairs, you'll have a chance to experience this. It's also reflected in the back window of that car, which becomes the sort of mirror upon which the composition is based. And then it also can be seen in the front of the car. So look at the painting carefully, because you begin to see the extraordinary role that reflection plays in his work. Now, on that screen, you see three different examples of Richard's fascination with reality as it becomes perceived through being mirrored or reflected onto the surface of automobiles. And the final work on the other side is actually quite recent. It's from 2004. Below it is an actual source photograph, not the specific source photograph for that work. Richard is extremely casual about his photographs. As I said, I really think my next job as an independent art curator is going to be your trash man, so I can make sure I get all these photographs which you throw out, because I think they're sort of fantastic. And he has his own special photographic vision, which I think someday will be prized along with the way he paints. But in any event, that's just an example, again, from the early part of the 2000s at the bottom of the kind of photographs he makes. And now, this work there is called Reflection of the cast iron building. And so there you see the building. And maybe you can make this out, the undulating surface of that structure right there. Oh, have I not turned on this mic? Ah, is anybody... Well, I won't repeat what I said, but I'll just say, I'm sorry. I didn't turn on the mic. Is that better? Okay, good. And now, were people like, could you hear anything from the back there? Okay. I mean, you were very attentive given the fact you didn't hear a word. But in any event, so I just showed that image. And then in the second image there, which is called, because Car Reflections, which again is two cars. Can you all kind of see that? It's the back of one car and the front of another car, and they become this marvelous surface upon which the city becomes reflected. And it's kind of fun for me because I live at 19th Street and 5th Avenue, so I thought it was so convenient that Richard made a painting at the corner of 19th Street and 5th Avenue. And you can see that by that sign being turned over. The magic of digital imagery. You can do wonderful things. However, I have been to that corner many times. I live a block away. I cannot find that corner that is in this painting a block away from me, because Richard is an illusionist. He tells you you're at the corner of 19th and 5th, or 20th and 5th, but you're not there, really. You're in Estes' realism world, which is usually a compilation of different kinds of images. And as Richard said, if it doesn't look right to me, I'm going to change it. I can do that. I'm the painter. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, because there's some great examples of that. Now, as we move on, we'll see really one of this classic early reflection painting of Richard's, which was the one that was kind of the featured picture on the little brochure of his very first show in February of 1968. And so that image is very rich and fascinating for me. It's called Horn and Hardach, or simply, but it was an automat. And you can't help but think of the great Hopper painting from 1927, which I've helped you think about, and having it right in the corner. And in a certain sense, this guy, because you now realize that's a guy sitting there, looks like maybe we should get them together, because, I mean, they're really not, neither one of them are having much of a good time. Then above, I just couldn't help resist again making a little detail. Because when I first looked at Richard's work, I thought, oh, I've made this amazing discovery. Richard has alien creatures, flying saucers in his work. When you look at those orange shapes that are up there in the sky, I thought maybe this is like a secret message of Richard's work. He always tells me, the meaning of my work is in the looking at the work. I don't have special stories or magical mystery tours. But of course I thought, well, what are these orange shapes? Well, of course they're the reflection of lights. And you can see that Hopper was doing a very similar thing as he made the reflections of light in the Automat painting. But keeping moving, we get to see other kinds of images of Richard. And this kind of classic image, very classic and sort of important for me because it's one of the two the two paintings by Richard, which are in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art and bought very soon after it was made in 1969. It's a work which reminds us, as Jessica did so eloquently, that Richard is part of a kind of a line, a succession, a progression of this sort of factual American realism that has played a role in the 19th century, and one can think of Pito and Harnett and others, but really is a wonderful part that he extends it. In other words, there's a tradition, and this person extends it in a very, very impressive way. And he extends a tradition which comes out of photography, which has been such a source for his work. And you see the Bernice Abbott in the center with the 5-cent signs on it, and then a Lee Friedlander work from the mid-60s, in which, again, Lee Friedlander has exploited the notion of reflection, and the reflection becomes effectively the reality. Here, I just wanted to take one of those things that you saw before, and maybe some of you can see painted by Richard Estes. Can you see those signs? Are they sharp? They're probably sharper in the front than they are in the back. So that's his sort of hidden way in the middle of the Candy Store, the painting from 1969, which, as I said, is one of the glories of the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. As we, again, kind of move on, we move to more of these paintings of the facades of buildings. This is really fascinating way for Richard to see the city. He often went out on Sunday mornings when the city was relatively empty. And also, as he first was making those trips in the 60s, there were still blue laws, so a lot of businesses were closed. Now we're sort of in the era of many, many places that are open are certainly the kinds of places that he often depicted 24/7. But at that moment, they weren't. And so he would go out in the street, and he'd go out with the camera that he used in those years, which was a tripod camera. And this is a sort of fascinating work, and it's called Double Self-Portrait from 1976, because it's the first time that Richard really appears in a clear way in his work. He appears, obviously, in the making of his works, but this is a double portrait of Richard's. Can you all see in the detail that Richard is there, and then he gets reflected, because he gets reflected onto the front of the building, and then the mirror in the back picks up his reflection. Very, to me, wonderful work. But it gave me an amazing insight because, I just love this particular painting. It's owned by the Museum of Modern Art. It's the cover of the catalog, and it seemed to us a kind of perfect way to signify the role that the camera plays in Richard's work, but at the same time, in a sense, the special kind of qualities of the way he looks at the world. But it made me realize that Richard should be in every one of these paintings with the facades, but he's deleted himself from those paintings. If he's there, he obviously was in this plate glass window at the front of that cafe, but he left it out. He's a deeply and truly self-effacing man. In any event, these works give us a sense of this kind of very early and important notion of what. And I want to just sort of read to you now a quote from Richard in 1968, as he really talked about reflection. He said, "A thought about reflection is that what we are looking at isn't there. The tactile and the visual poetry do not coincide. They overlap. Since all objects reflect, glass and chrome only more so, perhaps you show how they are or how we think they are." And then he's basically saying in a reflection. So the reflection becomes the reality. And the reality is, of course, the substance which exists in his work in so many ways to be reflected. Richard is consummately known as a painter of cities. That's what he sort of developed his reputation on. That's what early exhibitions featured in the many exhibitions that occurred for photorealism in the early years of that movement. And I just want to kind of give you a kind of a parade of images. A wonderful painting of Escalator, done in 1970, and beside it, Diner. The Diner work is from the Hirshhorn collection, and so we're very happy that they were so generous as to lend it. Now, continuing to move forward, I want to just show you another sort of city image, and a kind of a classic city image, the Brooklyn Bridge. And I'm showing you the Brooklyn Bridge in a little context. I hope you can read this. And I apologize to Richard because I took this photograph once when I was visiting him. This is Richard's studio in Maine. He has a wonderful studio in a beautiful town in Mount Desert, Maine, on Mount Desert Island, Maine. And he's painting on that, he paints on that easel that you see in the corner there. And it's a beautiful fireplace, and as you can see, the ceilings are quite tall. It probably was a ballroom in a sort of previous life, but now it's a kind of a very private sanctuary where Richard paints. And he never really liked the fact that he had that big space above his fireplace. So he made the biggest kind of scaled work that he's ever made in his career, which is 93 3/4 inches by 93 3/4 inches. He made one painting to go over there. He foolishly lent it, and then when he lent it, somebody wanted to buy it, so then he had to make another painting to go there. And we very, very much wanted this painting in the show, and Richard said he would lend it, which was really wonderful of him. Then I talked to him again, and he said, you know, I'm not going to lend it. I don't want that space blank. I really, it's my house, and it's my painting, and I'm going to keep it. And I called Jessica, and I said, Jessica, I have some kind of bad news. Richard just does not want to lend the Brooklyn Bridge picture. And she said, well, he has to lend it. I mean, there's just no choice. And I said, well, you know, there's another work which we're trying to get, and it's owned by a friend of Richard's, and they first declined the loan. And I asked Richard, because he couldn't lend this work, could he call those people, and could he see if they would be willing to lend the work? And Richard was great. He called them. They immediately agreed. You're not going to turn down the artist. When he calls, I mean, they could turn down us, but they're not going to turn down the artist. And so I thought, well, really, it's awful that we're not going to get that picture, but we have a kind of a, you know, there's a sort of a substitute in the sense that we're going to get this other wonderful work. Well, so I just sort of put it out of my mind. Well, Jessica called me 2 days later. He's lending the painting. He's all agreed. And I realized, when I want something from Richard, I'm going to turn to Jessica. I mean, in any event, at the bottom of that, you see one of the series of small snapshots that are probably the basis for this painting. And he often paints from very, very small snapshots. He's not making it easy for himself. But we're working on another project together, which will be at the Museum of Art and Design in New York starting next March. And we'll be able to show a few more of those photographs. And it's very nice of Richard to let us show them. But what they really reveal is the photograph is helpful to him, but really what he can do is just make amazing paintings from the slightest amount of sort of visual information or sketches that he's put in front of him. Now, as I was discussing earlier, the Art Institute of Chicago, its own collections become so much of what the students at the art school of the Art Institute, really learn from. And as Richard said, every day he would pass masterpieces. And so it finally dawned on me that two masterpieces that he had passed on a regular basis, the great painting of Rainy Day by Caillebotte, and then below it, Seurat's wonderful La Grande Jatte. These two paintings, which he passed every day, really had worked their way into his work. And I kind of knew it from day one because he was kind enough to title the painting in the lower corner, Sunday Afternoon in the Park. And so, I mean, I had a little kind of a hint. Richard was very helpful that way. And of course, it was as much an homage to Stephen Sondheim in a way as it was to Seurat, as sort of genius kind of played on itself. But just actually much, much later, as I was thinking about it, and too late to put in the catalog, regrettably, because I was so proud of this incredible insight it made, was that the Caillebotte, in its way, I especially felt that when I saw the drawing for the Caillebotte, which had no figures in it, and it looked, if Richard made such kind of sort of impromptu sketches, it would almost look like a kind of way that Richard looks at the city. The Paris painting is an interesting painting because it was kind of a breakthrough work for Richard because he'd never painted overtly a painting that was not of a US subject matter. He probably painted one that was of a building that he might have seen in an airport, but this was sort of explicitly non-New York picture. And it was painted in 1972, and luckily it's in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And I just have to say, Francis Lewis, my dear friend, is here, and it would never be here without Francis. So, Francis, you're going to be mad at me, but I can't resist saluting you. So, thank you, Francis, and thank you, Richard, for working together so well to bring that painting to the Richmond Museum. In any event, I want to keep moving, and as we keep moving, we see that Richard didn't just stop in Paris. He started to go to other places too, and he's always been a great traveler. The first painting, and this was a very important painting for me as I thought about this project, that he painted that included water was this painting of Murano glass, as he calls it. It's painted in 1976, the same year, interestingly, he painted that self-portrait. And it was fascinating because it was such a complex subject matter, and it sort of puzzled me over the years as to what exactly is going on in this picture. I went to the Venice Biennale last fall, and I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity. I'm going to find how Richard put this amazing composition together. It is, as some of you may recognize, the Rialto Bridge. And can you actually see it on the side there, further right off to the right? That's the Rialto Bridge going up in its arch, reflected in that window. And that's, I think, what I'll call an accurate reflection. The other accurate reflection is of the building that's right across from where this little store is. It used to be Murano Glass. Now, if you go there, don't get worried. It's a mask store. It's a different store. But it's the same building. And I know that because the details on the top of the building are really unchanged. It's just selling a new sort of a Venetian Chatska or whatever. But what you're seeing, that building, is the Palazzo, I'm going to pronounce this terribly, Camerlengi, Camperlini, which was an old bank, basically, and now knows, I don't know what it is, but it certainly becomes the structure that's right across the way. Now, he never, and Richard maybe can contradict me, he never could have been able to see the buildings that he has reflected in that window because they're way up the Grand Canal. And he obviously took a bunch of different photographs and he married them. I'm looking at Richard to see if he's looking at me sternly to say I'm doing the wrong thing. But in point of fact, that's something that I just feel so strongly about, that we all have to kind of keep in mind, that these works are, they're inventions. They are inventions, and we get to participate in that invention. It's not that every picture is that way. Now, Venice is a city that Richard really loves, and it reminds us of the historic artists that I think are the most important in considering his work, and they are an uncle and his nephew, the famous Canaletto and Bellato. It's the Bellato which is closest to me, and it has this wonderful view up the Grand Canal, looking north, and from the Palazzo Risanica. And then the Canaletto on the other side of La Salute. La Salute is way in the distance in Richard's picture. Richard's picture was a picture that he really made for himself. It's been shown once before publicly, but effectively this is the first time it's kind of come out of his dining room of this wonderful house that he has in Maine. And it's just a marvelous picture because the more you look at it, the more you realize it's really clouds and water. I mean, it's just this sort of evanescent natural landscape. Now, continuing to move forward, we see other places that Richard has been traveling to in Europe. Florence on one side, Paris is the wonderful painting of the Pont Neuf, and then below it, the Pont Alexandre. They're all done around the sort of similar period that he made 3 paintings of bridges in Paris in 1985. And then he made the view of Florence at about in 1970, I guess. No, excuse me, it was much later than that. But the other image that you see there is a photograph by Lee Friedlander, one of the photographers that Richard has really mentioned he was conscious of and was aware of as his work was developing. Because in a certain way, they were developing pretty much at the same time. They're just about the same age. But the Lee Friedlander photograph is a self-portrait from 1970. And I've sort of highlighted it because Richard has made 2 explicit self-portraits. They're both in the show, and they're facing each other in Virginia's wonderful installation upstairs. But he's made other kinds of self-portraits where he's taken himself and the shadow as he takes a photograph and incorporated it in the work, as he does in the Pont Alexandre. He also did it when he went to Florence, so that first of the dark shapes that's over to the right, that dark shape is Richard taking the photograph, and then he gets transposed on top of the wall in Florence as a second shadow. So he appears there. And it's not as if he was looking at Lee Friedlander, but they both were realizing that the shadow, in so many ways, can become the substance. The reflection, in a sense, can be realer than the thing itself. Richard has been very interested in other landscapes, but the other landscape in the United States that he's been deeply interested in, really since the late 1960s, when he first went to visit Alan and Claire Stone, who had a house on Mount Desert Island, was the island of Mount Desert Island and the state of Maine, which makes it, this show having originated in Maine in Portland, just so utterly appropriate. But the first time Richard actually painted Maine, having gone there quite regularly since 1969 was in 1970 when he made a portrait of Alan's wife, Claire, who's seen sort of sitting on the rocks. That portrait is upstairs, as most of the images that I'm showing you tonight are upstairs. And Alan had two other artists in his gallery, George Deem and Wayne Thiebaud, make portraits of Claire. So he said to Richard, would you make one? And Richard really hadn't really made any portraits. I mean, he'd made one portrait of a great friend of his, Margaret Yourcenar, the great writer, the great French writer, because she was inducted into the Académie Française, and part of the induction is that you have to have your portrait done. So she turned to Richard to make her portrait. But portraits are something that Richard has made several of, but it wasn't something that was a specialty. He and Claire drove around. Claire dressed herself in her own way of dressing, and because she's a big hiker, so she loves to hike. And so she really is dressed for that occasion. But this painting, of course, that was sort of, is based on another painting of an American artist that Richard has a wonderful relationship with, Frederick Church. And so you see the Frederick Church of that same pair of mountains, the tallest one being Mount Cadillac, which is the tallest mountain on the island. But I can't help but think about Richard in his own way interpreting in a 20th century manner the sort of portraiture tradition of England, where you see the grand lady sitting, what I guess were her hiking clothes, in the Gainsborough painting from 1785. And then, of course, as I think of this wonderful double portrait that Richard did of great friends of his as they were coming back in a wonderful boat known as the Delight from Bear Island, which is right behind there, on Swan Island, and as they're looking to Northeast Harbor, towards Northeast Harbor, where they're going to land in a matter of minutes or whatever, he originally had taken a photograph of this composition that you see in the upper right-hand corner, thinking that he would leave the figures out. But he just said, you know, they're wonderful there. It's a marvelous kind of a vignette of a mother and a daughter, as it turns out, and I want to keep it. But of course, again, being a little bit of a hopeless kind of bad art historian, I can't resist thinking that it is really like his own version of a Tissot. These lovely-looking women sitting in this boat as they sort of glide through their lives. Again, moving forward, we see another portrait, and a portrait which will be of a building and of a person who may be familiar to all of you. Richard was commissioned by a person who really is interested in doing portraits of sort of extraordinarily accomplished people, to do a portrait of I.M. Pei. And so he painted I.M. Pei in the research library in the East Wing building of the National Gallery. And again, as I said, Richard has magical powers. He decided the Capitol building should be able to be seen from the great window there. And somehow he was able, at least for temporarily, to move the building, to take a very good photograph in its new site, and then probably very deftly the next morning, maybe it was a Sunday morning so nobody noticed, to restore the painting to its other location. Again, I think it's such a clever idea that Richard decided that the best way to portray an architect really is within one of his greatest buildings. Now, Maine, as I said, has been a crucial place for Richard. And these are all pictures that that sort of respond to his love of the landscape. The painting on the top, Mount Katahdin, is happily owned by a museum in Maine, the Colby Museum, so it gets to be seen by lots of people. But again, its marvelous and close kinship to a work by Frederick Church is really worth marveling at. And it's a church from 1895 that you see right below it that is remarkably similar. And whenever I see these two paintings together, I think of a wonderful quote, which at the Portland Museum, which has this painting by Frederick Church on long-term loan, that they've put on their label about it, because it was one of the final paintings that he made, and he wrote a letter to his wife about the painting, who he gave the painting to originally. And he said in that letter, "Your old guide is paddling his canoe in the shadow, but he knows that the glories of the heavens and earth are seen more appreciatively in the shade." Now, Richard's pictures are incredibly sunlit and with wonderful blue skies in so many cases. But there's a quality of Richard's work to me that's very much like what the poetry of the Church statement, that he's sort of, there he is quietly in the corner, and he's actually, by being quiet and being in the corner and being effectively invisible, he's seeing the world even more carefully and closely than the rest of us can. In any event, on the other side of the screen is another view of Acadia National Park. I said to Richard when I was seeing him this summer up in Maine, I said, could we go to that site? Because I was convinced I could find it. But of course, you can't find it. I mean, Richard said, well, no. I mean, it's all different now. So, but of course, he lives in Maine, and I live in New York City. In any event, going forward, other exotic places that Richard has painted, wonderful series of works in Antarctica that were in 2006 and 2007, right at the end of the year and the beginning of 2007, when he was on a big boat, and you see that big boat as he looks out at these marvelous natural formations in Antarctica. But in Richard's paintings, you'll often see the boat. You'll often see where he's painting the image from, because he wants that sort of man-made source. He doesn't want it to be magical. He wants you to say, I was on that boat and I took a photograph off that boat. The second series of Antarctica pictures, and he's made about 20 to 25 of them in all now. The second series were done on a trip that he took in 2011, and they were on a smaller ship, so they were able to get into a smaller boat on that smaller ship and actually get much, much closer. So there's a very different feeling to the second group of works. William Bradford, a great 19th century American artist, specialized in doing icebergs and doing such landscapes as Richard, but it's just one of the many facets of Richard's work. In the lower corner is a park in Alaska, another one of Richard's trips. This is a work that's off the porch of Olana, which many of you may remember is the wonderful house, a kind of fantastic house and property, which Frederick Church built a house on and owned on the Hudson River. And so Richard was visiting one day, and he took a great series of photographs, or at least a few photographs, and then he painted them into this work, which again was a work which Richard kind of kept for himself. And what was really nice was he was willing to lend some of those works. They're the odd pictures of Richard's, but in a certain sense, I thought they could tell us something about Richard we truly didn't know, and be new kind of revelations. And in the lower corner is a wonderful example of Frederick Church's work, Twilight in the Wilderness, the great painting owned by the Cleveland Museum. Richard has continued to look at the city in different ways. These are two fantastic pictures which are upstairs. I have just some photographs of the kind of random photographs that give you a sense of the pictorial data that he uses in order to make his compositions, just to let you see those very quickly, but also to marvel at these two tiny, incredibly compact paintings, which you'll see upstairs, which are so full of this amazing complexity that he brings to every realist subject, and a certain sense of drama as he isolates the figures in the subway. Another great, sorry. There's the right one. So this is a wonderful opportunity just to quickly see how certain compositions are very key for Richard in terms of the way he structures works of art. So you see, quite often he'll paint people in, or he'll make paintings of people in buses. A bus is an easier place to take a photograph than a subway is, because there's more privacy, and there's a sense that you might be a tourist and you would logically taking a photograph out the window. But what I always love in many of these paintings is Richard makes these bus windows so gigantic. As you begin to look at the scale of that bus, he really lets you see the Plaza Hotel. On the other side is one of the wonderful paintings that he's made of the Staten Island Ferry. Briefly, when he was first in New York, he had an apartment on Staten Island, and so he used to take the ferry. But now he takes it, and it becomes an amazing aesthetic source for him. Again, let me just go forward. And this is a combination that's going to really annoy Richard. It's a combination of this fabulous painting upstairs of Times Square with a marvelous example of Robert Rauschenberg's works that use silkscreen. Because I see this section of Richard's work having the same kind of incredible vivacity and sort of wildness of a Robert Rauschenberg. And it underscores for me a very important point that I've said at the beginning, but I'll reiterate right now, that Richard's realism, the power of Richard's realism, to a great degree, comes from his fantastic facility as a painter of really what are abstractions of realism. That becomes even clearer, I think, in the next pairings that I show you. Two of my favorite paintings of Richard's, the Antarctica picture is just a work that you kind of gasp as you stand in front of it. It's owned by the Crystal Bridges Museum, and so it gets to be seen by a wide public. Above it is a painting of the old Cordova Bridge in Spain. But I just show you, isolate you, sort of sections of those paintings which have these amazingly rich pictorial surfaces to them. And you just feel that Richard is in love, obviously, with the way the world looks, but he's also in love with the act of painting and the magic of the act of painting. A more recent series of Richard's has been Nocturnes. They started about 4 or 5 years ago, and he's made probably 30 nocturnes in all. And so I just sort of have kind of piled up 2 of those recent nocturnes. One of Columbus Circle in New York, and it's called Columbus Circle at Night, 2011. And below it is a work called Broadway Bus Stop. And it sort of, again, reminds us of the transience of New York. You can't find that Barnes & Noble because, well, there are not that many Barnes & Nobles left in general, but the one that was right across from Lincoln Center, which Richard was painting in this particular instance, is now, I think, a Century 21. So maybe books don't sell, but clothes still do sell, as it were. Now, they may smell too. But in any event, the work on the top is just, we're in Washington and we're close to the Freer, so I couldn't resist showing a nocturne by Whistler, because the nocturne has lots of wonderful sort of emotional kind of qualities to it. And below is an example of Yvonne Jacquet, just a painter of our own time, and to see the stylizations that occur and how Richard eschews stylization as we really hone in. Now, just as I get to these final slides, I can't resist showing you an early work of Richard's next to very recent works of Richard's, to show you that A, his skills are phenomenal, and they have gotten not one iota less phenomenal in the passage of time, but there's a consistency of the vision. As Richard said, everybody, oh, I haven't given you the new slide. As Richard said, when a lot of people look at that painting in the upper right-hand corner, which was a work called Checkout from 2012, they marvel at the way the figures in the painting are painted. And you'll notice that they are replicated in the mirrors that line the columns in the front of that place. But Richard said it wasn't that I didn't want to paint those people. They were there, so I painted them. But I really wanted to paint what was happening in the window. And so there's a great consistency with what he painted in 1969 in the candy store. The bottom work is the wonderful Jones Diner, and it isn't a misspelling. That is the way it actually is called, Jones Diner. And then a very recent work of Richard's, which was so recent we couldn't put it in the show, called The Eye Man. And again, they both use this sort of scaffolding and the structuring of the scaffolding. Eye Man is one of my sort of favorite works of Richard's, and I also think it's a great way of sort of thinking about Richard as kind of an eye man, a person who really lives through his eyes, so the optometrist becomes a sort of motif. This is the most recent of Richard's, of the two sort of explicit self-portraits that he's made. It's called No Smoking, or it's called actually, oh, sorry, it's called, not really called No Smoking, but No Smoking kind of dominates the composition. And it's Richard on the Staten Island ferry, taking a photograph from outside, from one of the decks of the Staten Island ferry, into the center room of the Staten Island ferry, a space, a waiting area. And he said the only people who ever sit there are people who are tourists, because, I mean, the tourists are all outside, so it's only the people who are the commuters who are inside. And then all the tourists on the other side are looking at the Statue of Liberty. But Richard appears to be awash in water, but that's the reflection of the water that's behind him on the window that he is standing in front of. Are you kind of following this? Okay, good, good. I mean, it took me a while to figure it out, but you probably got it all right away. I'm just going to show you one more image, and then we're going to have Richard join us. And that one more image is Richard's current painting. He's still working on it. He's really going to be annoyed at me that I showed it to you, because it's an unfinished work. But I want to show you what an unfinished Richard Estes looks like that has, he says, several weeks to go. So just know we're dealing with a master. And now if the master will join the curator, we'll have some real substance. Where do you want to sit? You pick.
Over here.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for Richard, and then we'll open it to everybody. And if you're dying to ask a question, maybe you just should interrupt me because I've been talking a lot. But I want to just say I want to ask him some questions which I probably was too fearful to. But now there's a whole audience, and you'll back me up. I'm going to just ask you, Richard, there was so little in your background, your family life, and your upbringing that would have indicated you were going to have a lifelong commitment to fine art. How can you explain that you've become an artist?
I couldn't do anything else.
Can you all hear Richard? Okay, he's got to turn himself on too, and I think you have to just.
No,
maybe it's already on. Okay,
they said
okay,
it's on.
oh, okay, it's on.
Yeah.
So, did everybody hear that? I'll make him repeat it. Richard, why have you been a lifelong artist when you had nothing in your past that would have indicated this was going to happen to you?
Well, there wasn't anything in my past that indicated that anything in particular would have happened to me.
Well, but you became a very motivated artist.
I like being an artist because I can do it myself. I don't have to work with anyone else. I was never good at sports for that reason. I never was any good in a team.
And you also said you didn't really want to work at an office particularly.
Well, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of being in a team.
Well, we're all on your team, so
Yeah.
just know that. Your talent as a painter is really prodigious, yet you really took some time for your mature practice to begin. You were in your mid-30s when you had your first gallery show. What were the factors that contributed to what one might call, by contemporary terms, when artists are still in graduate school and they're beginning to get exhibitions, and when people in their 20s can have huge reputations? What was the sort of, what slowed you down? Because you clearly had an extraordinary talent, so that your first show was really in your mid-30s.
I don't think the early paintings, well, they were really quite ready, actually. I didn't have time to do much because I was working and doing illustration and work in advertising. And that's where I really learned how to paint.
Doing the advertising,
rather than the Art Institute, frankly.
Well, Richard was always said that he would get these jobs that would require lettering, and he was saying, I only wished I'd taken that class when I was
No, I had to
in school.
learn it on the job.
Yeah.
More. Yeah.
But you
But
did.
they did all that stuff in those days. You know, now, you know, all those things I used to do are done by computers.
Yeah. You really you had your success from your first exhibition in Allen Stone, and you've continued to sell your work on a very regular basis. By my rough calculation, you've maybe made about 500 paintings, and of the mature paintings that are photo-derived, and you've made quite a wonderful group of prints as well. Your artistic output really, to me, continues to be kind of outstanding. I mean, it's just amazing how many works you'll make. I'll come and visit you, and you're always just finishing a work, going on to a work. This last work that I showed just a second ago, I think, is as good as any work you've ever made, and here it is happening to you. What drives your creativity? I mean, what really keeps your energy going and makes you be able to make so many paintings?
I think it's just a habit.
Can you give us any clues as how we could develop that habit, or?
I don't know what else to do. You know?
Yeah. Now, many people consider you really, if not the preeminent photorealist painter, certainly a very preeminent photorealist. But how would you describe your art?
I don't know. I think I'm just an old-fashioned artist, not much different than Bellato, except he didn't have the camera like I did.
Yeah.
But he did have instruments too that were camera-like. They had what was called the camera obscura,
Yeah.
which enabled him to get the drawing more easily than just drawing it.
Richard tells a wonderful story about Bellato, that Bellato painted many places. He's well known for his paintings of Venice, but he also painted Warsaw. And after the war, when Warsaw was so badly bombed, they used Bellato paintings to become the reference for how they could rebuild Warsaw. Would you want some of the paintings that you've painted rebuilt? I mean, some of the works you've painted and architecture you've painted rebuilt?
Some of them,
Yeah.
but a lot of them, no.
I mean, you famously said that, I mean, you really wouldn't preserve these pictures if you, I mean, these buildings if you had the option.
It depends on the building.
Yeah.
You know, certainly I would preserve the Chrysler building or the Flatiron building.
But you
maybe
often
not
paint
the
those in a
Chase
kind of
Manhattan
incidental
Bank.
way. I mean, in other words, it's not as if you take a monumental structure. That's what makes the Brooklyn Bridge painting such a remarkable picture. You took an icon and you presented it iconically. But a lot of times, you'll see the World Trade Centers, or you'll see the buildings, or you'll see, like the Empire State Building is a little building way off to the side, or St. Paul's Cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
So you preserve them, but you kind of keep them off to the side.
Right.
Because so many of the
You're
paintings,
talking about the London?
yeah, the London painting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I had to, that was several photos because
Yeah.
you're really looking down the river when you see, in order to see
St. Paul's, right.
and then looking in this direction for the bridge.
And I just have one more question before we turn it over to everybody else. You've made such a sustained, major, and impressive statement as a realist painter. What do you feel about abstraction and modern 20th century art and 21st century developments?
I always felt that abstraction was, like you said in the beginning, it's sort of a foundation for a painting, but it's really not enough. You know, I think that for some reason it just, you know, you can't make any mistakes in abstraction. You can't do a bad drawing in abstraction because, but in realism, you know, it has to be right.
So what do you think about a painter like Mondrian?
I don't know, I find it rather boring.
Or how about like Pollock, Jackson Pollock?
The same.
Yeah. Okay. With that dismissal, I'm going to turn it over to you. So if you have questions, I think there's a mic, but so there's a mic, and so if you have a question, raise your hand, or if you have a comment or thought, and somebody does right there, and then just say it into a mic so everybody can hear.
Good evening. I just have one question.
Oh, can you come? Would you mind going over there, I guess? Oh, you're right there. Sorry, good.
Just a question about the mediums in which you work in. You've made a certain number of prints, but not that many. Could you talk about your relationship to printmaking and lithographs and whether you plan to make more of those and how you look at it relative to the body of your art? Thank you.
I don't know, frankly. I don't think I might, but I really don't
Richard's
know.
made 3 sets of prints which were all called the Urban Landscapes, Urban Landscape 1, 2, and 3. And then he subsequently made other silk screens because that was the medium that he used in his prints. But he's made some kind of amazing woodcuts as well.
Right, but I haven't done it. It's all, I just do the
Initial
design,
artwork.
essentially.
But you played a big role in the wood in the silk screens.
The silk screen, I really cut
The plastic,
the
yeah.
screen.
Yeah, the screens.
And really did it, but not the woodcuts. That's beyond me to carve into these wood blocks.
But you made those prints because many people approached you and wanted you to make a print. So it was a collaboration, the Domberger prints and others.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have to do, ask me to do what.
So other thoughts? And I,
The paintings are very clean. Even the painting in Venice downstairs that shows the scene coming around the water, all the buildings seem perfect. As if many of the Venice buildings have fallen apart. So, I mean, that's when I looked at them all an hour ago, everything seems very clean. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that question. Why don't things look dirtier than the way I do it? Somehow the dirt doesn't happen. Maybe it's too detailed. I have to learn to do better detail.
And a lot of people have thought there was no trash in Richard's cityscapes. But in fact, if you look, the trash is there. Well, I think that's just a nasty Washington remark about New York City, because New York City is immaculately clean. At least that's the way it looks to Richard and me. I don't know. But no, there is a fair amount of trash in his paintings. But maybe there's even more trash in New York City.
Excuse me, could you
What is your
present-
favorite painting that you have
Yeah.
painted was the question. And
I
Richard,
don't know. I don't really. Usually when I paint it, I just forget about it.
well, Richard has a number of paintings actually, he was very kind and lent a number of works to this exhibition, and he has a number of works in his house in New York, and his place in New York, and his place in Maine. And I said, Richard, how did you choose those particular works to save and to keep? And he said,
They didn't sell.
so there's some questions from over there.
As
Three in a
someone
row.
who likes photography, I'm very curious. Till recently, we used to have to worry about rolls of 24 and 36. We'd take them home, we'd go to a dark room, we'd develop them. We haven't heard what you do. Now we can look around a room, people are taking a dozen photographs as I'm asking this question. We have digital photography. You can take hundreds of different views of any of your scenes. So what do you do now, and how has digital photography changed
Well,
what
I
you
use
do?
a digital camera, and I make my prints with Photoshop, and it's great. I mean, you can manipulate and change and bring out things that you know I never was able to do before.
But Richard told me the last painting that you're working on now, you said you didn't do printouts, you just looked off the computer screen.
No, I
Okay,
never
good.
look at the printer
Oh.
screen. No.
Oh, I was asking him for the prints, and he
No,
said, I
no.
don't have any, so.
No, I make prints.
Okay,
And the last one, I think what I told you
Yeah.
was that I did different exposures, so you could expose for the shadows
Right.
and for the highlights.
but those all got
So
printed,
that, you know, it's
and they all got printed out.
then when you print it out, and
Yeah.
also there's little changes.
That you could make.
Different figures move around a little bit.
The next question.
I left my home country of Serbia, Yugoslavia, in 1958. I came to Chicago some later. I have a brother who is artist in Belgrade. I have a brother who is architect. I am local yokel in College Park, but I like with left hand to use the drawing, similar to you. My question is, for your realism, you are missing something. You talked a few minutes ago about the war. You bypassed tsunami in Japan. You bypassed
He said
Hiroshima.
your realism is
You
missing
bypassed,
things. In other
Chernobyl
words,
in
your
Ukraine.
realism doesn't
What
include
the other side of the
Hiroshima.
situation, or you're a Detroit.
I don't know.
Okay.
Is it
He's saying
specially
that
or not?
he feels your realism is missing some of the occurrences, political occurrences, the occurrences of war, etc. And he feels that's missing in your work. Do you feel that you should have more political content, some
I
more?
don't think it should have any political content.
And
I mean, I think that's not what art is all about. If you want to do politics, do politics, but
But your work is not
it
about
has
those
nothing-
issues.
has no political meaning whatsoever.
Okay. Next question.
Hi. You had your first show in 1968, I believe it was said, and that's the same year that I believe Warhol had his first show. That was the time when Warhol and other pop artists such as Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg were coming of age in the New York art scene. Clearly, you all were sourcing from the same place, and you're doing, in your paintings, commodities take center stage, branding, logos, that sort of thing. Did you feel at the time that there were any affinities between your work and those of the pop artists, or did you really feel like you were operating on a different track?
I don't remember exactly. I don't, I really never paid much, and I still don't pay much attention to what other people are doing.
But what do you think about pop art?
It's pop.
Yeah. And some number of those artists actually began a few years earlier than Richard. So
Yeah, I think Andy Warhol had a show long before 1968.
he did.
I think I was aware of at least I felt at least it has some realism to it. It wasn't totally abstract.
Abstract, right.
Even,
Other questions?
Robert Bateman, a highly respected naturalist artist who paints animals in their environments, said in a lecture that the first 5% of his paintings and the last 5% of his paintings were really, for him, the most exciting, but that everything in between was a lot of work. Do you have favorite phases of your whole process from start to finish? And do you have any parts that you
You
consider
mean
more
an individual painting or?
Just the
in
process
general
of creativity.
process?
Are there aspects of the process of creativity that you like? Do you like making the photographs? Do you like then deciding which photograph you're going to use, which details you're going to use? In other words, what part of your process fascinates you the most?
I don't think there's much difference. I mean, each thing that you do has its own problems.
Yeah.
But I don't think any one
Is
is
more
fascinating than the other.
Okay.
I had a technical question. My understanding is early on you tended to do monochrome underpaintings with glazes for the colors. Are you still using that process, if in fact
What's
you ever
that?
did?
He's said he has a technical question to ask, and his question is, did you use undertones and glazes?
I never used much glazes until the very end. You can just sort of make subtle adjustments, but.
Okay.
Well, I want to answer something that Richard told me that I think will interest people. The first layer is acrylic, and then the second layer is oil.
It
But
used
now,
to be.
yeah, it used to be. Now he's changed it. But for the majority of your paintings, it was an acrylic underlayer,
Yeah,
so he could
simply-
get the information
yeah.
down quickly, and then it was
Well,
refined
also you
in
can
oil.
change it more easily.
Exactly.
Because the acrylic doesn't,
It
doesn't
dries,
bleed.
yeah, exactly.
If you try changing from a very dark to a light in oil, the oil has
It'll
a
seep
tendency
out.
to bleed through. And not right away either. It could be 20 years later.
But now you're not doing the acrylic so much
No, I just-
undercoat.
I stopped doing acrylic. Yeah.
Why
I just hated the feel of it, to work with it. It's not pleasant.
And you're probably adept enough, so all you needed was the oil layer anyway.
Yeah, basically, I never, it was something I knew I could do, but never really changed things that much.
And Richard
anyhow.
paints on a wood support and also on canvas support. Would you want to say a word about how you choose whether you're going to be on
Well, you
wood or
choose
canvas?
Simply the weight.
Okay.
If you want to do something that's, 30 by 60, it starts to get too heavy if you use board. But I actually like the board better.
As the support.
Because with canvas, if the atmosphere changes, it starts to flap.
Next question.
Hi. As a graduate student, I admired your work. So did some of my peers. However, at the time you were painting, you surfaced at the late 60s and 70s as a rebel. Today, people see realism not as a rebel, and I say a rebel because it was the heyday of conceptual art, process art, and whatever you call it art. Did you ever consider what you were doing was bucking the tradition of the art world?
Well, I knew certainly that I really didn't fit in with a lot of these people. But I wasn't, what could I do? I got to do what I do, and I really can't worry about what other people are doing.
And I think it's fair to say that Richard has been part of a group of artists who used photographs as the source of their work, but they didn't become your social community of friends.
I never knew any of these people until after
After the fact.
After the fact.
And you have many, many friends, but I wouldn't say that the majority of your friends are necessarily artists.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I mean, they are a lot of art in the arts, but not painters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing what you did.
Well, thank you.